Welcome back to another episode of the Media Pass. I am your host, Alex, with my other host, Matt. Matt, how you doing?
I am doing incredible now that I see my good friend Alex. It's his new webcam that is not at all giving him fits or bothering him. Please, in the comments, pester Alex about his new webcam. Make his perfectionist mindset tingle.
I literally felt like a boomer setting this up. I was like fumbling with cords, and Matt was watching me like get it set up, and the camera was like flying all around my office and just like showing various angles of my office because I couldn't figure out how to get it set up. But fortunately, we're here.
At one point, it was like you didn't even notice it. I wasn't gonna say anything because I'm a grown up. But at one point, it was literally the camera was pointing at your crotch as you were trying to like fix it and stuff, and it was just like in my face on the Zoom. I'm not gonna say anything because I'm an adult.
Right. Until we're live on the podcast, you're not gonna say anything. Oh well. All of that to say, today we're gonna be talking about the Los Angeles Clippers, which. We planned on doing this episode about a week ago, but the holidays happened. I actually ended up getting sick. Last Friday, I woke up feeling like death, and fortunately feel better now, feel completely fine. But the Clippers that we were watching a week ago is a little bit different than the Clippers that we're watching now. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard has missed some time with, I believe, a hip injury. Which is new. Normally it's been his knees and his like hamstrings and stuff like that. And then now it's his hip. So, Matt, just quick vibe check for you. Where are you at on the Clippers right now? Let's set the table a little bit for this discussion.
Okay, awesome. Let me get my spectacles on for the people watching on YouTube, because I think I'm going to read some stats. So since the Harden trade, the Clippers are 15-10, 10th in offensive rating, 13th in defensive rating, 12th in net rating. Now, they have not lost a game with a healthy Kawhi Leonard since November 30th. That was against the Golden State Warriors, who are sneakily good again. The number that I really want to focus on, and I don't know if you agree, disagree, but the day they added Daniel Tice to the roster, okay? I think it was like November 16th they signed him. His first game was November 17th. Never thought I would be talking about him as kind of this inflection point in a team season, but that's what it's been for the Clippers. So since they signed him, they're 15-5. They have the second most wins during that time. They're 8th in offensive rating, 12th in defensive rating, and 7th in net rating. That doesn't answer the vibe question you asked me, but I feel like just, start out with the stats. I'm going to take the binoculars off now since I'm done reading stats for a little while. Vibe check wise, I really deep scouted them last week, wrote about Kawhi Leonard a little bit, a player who holds a very special place in my heart. And I really don't know what to make of this team. So I read those numbers. They look like pretty balanced on both sides of the ball. Their indicators look good. One of the things we always talk about on this show, what I try to talk about a lot in my work when I'm talking about contenders, is do you fit like one of the three umbrellas, which is, are you an elite offense, are you an elite defense, or are you balanced on both sides of the ball? We'll dig more into this, but my questions are, do you fit under that third umbrella for the Clippers? Because when I watch them, it's pretty easy to tell. If you have James Harden and you have older Kawhi Leonard, older PG playing a bunch of minutes, you're probably not going to be an elite defense, not in 2023, 2024. And then on offense, I think, and again, I'm doing a lot of alluding right now. I think we'll get more into this, but they don't they haven't fixed the your turn, my turn stuff. I think they've just started to master it better. I think it's just more fluid, your turn, my turn. It's not like this dynamic, beautiful, like Sacramento Kings ball movement with the dribble handoffs and all that stuff. It's not that. They just have guys who are really good at hitting shots and like have learned how to kind of, okay, it's PG's turn, it's Kawhi's turn. Let's go James Harden, spam some pick and roll. So I'm like, okay, can you be like top 10 on offensive rating, top 10 in defensive rating is kind of what I'm asking myself. The other two things I want to know before I turn it over to you, I know I'm saying a lot, but I want to set the table for all of this. The two things I want to know that are really important. Thank you. Lineup changes. The big one being Terrence Mann has been inserted in the starting lineup. Russell Westbrook is on the bench now, but they've also shored up that rotation. So they're only playing 9 guys when they're fully healthy. It's the starters, which is Mann, Kawhi, Harden, Paul George, Zubac, and then off the bench is Westbrook, Powell, my guy Daniel Tice, and then Amir Coffey. So that means no PJ Tucker, no Bones Highland. Kobe Brown's not really playing. I don't know how much he factors into all this calculus. So there's that big thing. And then the other thing is when I look at their 15 wins, okay, I went ahead and noted something. I know it's the regular season. It's very rare that you see like a matchup where both teams are completely healthy, especially at this point. But I'm looking at the 15 wins. Okay, so they beat the Rockets. Rockets weren't missing anyone, so that's an impressive win, right? Beat the Spurs without Vassell. Beat the Spurs again. It's the Spurs. They beat the Mavericks without Lively and Kleber. Beat the Kings without your guy Keegan Murray. Beat the Warriors without Chris Paul, Gary Payton II, and Wiggins. Beat the Nuggets, who weren't missing anyone major, so that's put a pin in that. That's a nice win. Beat the Jazz without Lauri Markkanen, which is basically like, conquering heaven without Jesus Christ there. Beating the Blazers without Jerry Grant.
Did you just pull that analogy just out of the thin air?
Yeah, I did.
Well, you hadn't heard that anywhere before?
No, I made that up. This is a spoiler alert. I made a little video for the channel where I was fawning over Lauri Markkanen. So I've been thinking about Lauri a lot. And it's the holiday season. So Jesus has crossed my mind once or twice. But anyways, back to so we got the Jazz, Lauri Markkanen. They beat the Blazers without Jeremy Grant, DeAndre, and Robert Williams III. Beat the Kings. Everybody was healthy. Beat the Warriors without Draymond and Gary Payton. Beat the Knicks without Mitchell Robinson. Beat the Pacers without Andrew Nembhard, Miles Turner, and Jalen Smith. Beat the Mavericks without Lively, Kleber, Josh Green, Kyrie Irving. And then they beat the Hornets without LaMelo, Brandon Miller, Mark Williams, but they were without Kawhi. I say all that to say they have a couple of really impressive wins in there in that 15-5 stretch, but a lot of it's, they're beating these either bad teams or teams that are missing guys. So that's very long-winded way of giving you all my vibes. What do you want to do with that?
I mean, I guess I'll just kind of give you where I'm at with the Clippers. Ever since Kawhi went down, I've developed more questions than answers. And then if you asked me about the Clippers like a week and a half ago, I would have been like very confident in my opinion of them. And then now as I've watched them progress and, James Harden has kind of had to be James Harden again without Kawhi there. It's definitely different and more of an adjustment, and I'm not as sure how much this team is going to be able to weather the postseason. But that being said, there's a lot of stuff that we've seen from the Clippers that I think went under the radar for the stretch where they were fully healthy. People started to kind of wake up to it. One of the biggest things to me was James Harden defensively. I'd say that this is probably the most invested on the defensive end that I've seen James Harden in a really long time. And I'm not just talking for like, there's certain guys once they reach a certain level, they can lock in when they want to. We say that about a lot of players that, where they're like, yeah, they can be an elite defender if they want to, or, if you get them angry or if it's a close game, they'll lock up. James Harden, in the majority of the minutes that I've watched him play, from the time he comes off the bench to the time he goes back to the bench, is invested on the defensive end. And that's not to say that he still doesn't make mistakes. He does make plenty of mistakes. But I think the important thing is that those mistakes are not due to a lack of effort. He is not as easy to target on the defensive end. Not necessarily because he's like super quick on his feet. He's doing a good job holding his own, in my opinion. But more importantly is because he's so invested, he has been a very active communicator with the rest of the team on the defensive end, calling out switches, telling guys when they need to chase a guy off a screen. He's doing the things that he needs to do as an individual and as part of the team to cover up whatever deficiencies James Harden might have as a defender in 2023, 2024. Offensively, the thing that's kind of surprised me is, you mentioned how they're not really doing something drastically different than, other let this guy cook teams have in the past, where they're just kind of taking turns. I agree with that. But what surprised me is how much just like spread pick and roll the Clippers offense is heavy on. Like any given game you tune into, where Kawhi, Paul George, and James Harden are on the floor together, it's like spread pick and roll, spread pick and roll, spread pick and roll. Sometimes they'll have like these pin down screens in the paint for Kawhi to like get it at the elbow. They do other things. And that's not to say that their entire offense is just James Harden pick and rolls, but it's like shocking how much they're just like spamming that to start possessions, and it's working very, very well. And James Harden, this is just based off eye test. I haven't looked at the numbers for this, but in terms of how heavily he's leaning on isolation, I feel like it's very, very little, especially compared to, Philly, because he was the second guy in Philly. Now it's like he's operating as basically a pass first point guard. And it's working very, very well because he's still a scoring threat. He's still James Harden. The important thing is he seems healthy. So he seems healthy. He seems comfortable with that first step. There's a little bit more burst than we saw there at times in Philly, definitely more than what we saw from him in Brooklyn. And I think that's just opened up a lot for them. And we can dive further into some of the other stuff, but in terms of just kind of gut check with the Clippers so far, I would say that's the thing that stood out to me the most is James Harden seems more than happy to be the third guy, which I think was also the case in Brooklyn. I think he was happy to be the third guy. Philly, he had to step back up into that second option role. And then now it's like, okay, you've got Kawhi and Paul George. You don't need to do as much anymore. And I think that's allowed him to play more energized basketball.
Yeah, just to put a pin in all that you said, James Harden is currently averaging 25.7 points per 100 possessions, which would be the lowest he's averaged since 2010-2011, back when he was a sixth man on the Oklahoma City Thunder. So it checks out kind of what you're saying, distributing the wealth. I agree with you. Like we saw in Brooklyn, if you put like other score-centric players around him, like Harden is wise enough to kind of defer to them. There was like a reason for like pause at the beginning when this trade happened, and he was kind of like, he made his comment, "I am the system." You're like, oh wait, what is he trying to do here? Kawhi Leonard is not Luke Richard and Baute. He will not just stand there in the corner for you. He has he has other things he can bring to the table. But okay, I think the best way to go about this, right? So do you agree with me? I think we can get this off the table. The Clippers will not be an elite defense with this current roster, right?
I would agree.
Yeah, elite meaning like I'm talking like you're 5 points better than the league average, 6 points better than the league average. I'm talking like Minnesota Timberwolves, Orlando Magic like type defense, right?
I agree. Yeah,
and then on offense. So on offense, it's like tricky to me because like I think in the regular season, because of it's still like this your turn, my turn kind of dance. Like you don't get that like, that incredibly efficient like 2-man dribble handoff, synchronized dance, right? That you get with some of these other like high powered offenses. Because of that, I don't see them as elite regular season offense. But I think that this offense has like a really strong like resiliency, like playoff resiliency kind of component to it, because like I'm looking at it, okay, like from what I know about the playoffs, right? You see a team like a team that I've been pretty low on, and it's paid off lately with how they're playing, is the Indiana Pacers, right? Because I look at their offense and I'm like, it's very opportunistic, right? They get a lot of the low hanging fruit, and in the playoffs, like all that low hanging fruit like is gone, right? Teams are much more tighter. They tighten up the screws. They don't let like little things happen like getting cross matched off of makes. They do a better job of like not over helping on certain guys or over helping on other guys that they deem to be non-threats on offense. So I look at those offenses and I'm like, okay, I expect like them to fall off a little bit in the playoffs. I look at this offense and I'm like, well, so it's like you have like James Harden spread pick and roll, like, tale as old as time. That's a hard thing to stop, right? If you do figure out how to stop it. You have Kawhi Leonard, one of the great postseason scorers this game has ever been blessed with. He's so strong. Even if you get like a good contest, like does it really matter? Because he's such a good tough shot maker. So you have him. Like if James Harden's not working, he could be firing on all cylinders. If that's not working, you got playoff P. You got, smooth Paul George and his crossover and his step back and his drag step and all those pretty little moves. They have so much shot making on this team. And like the thing is, like, and this is why like so many people fell in love with Kobe Bryant. Like shot making is so hard to like whittle away at in the playoffs. Like what you are as a shot maker in the regular season, it's pretty often what you are in the playoffs. There's the exceptions where there's guys like, Kevin Durant, who historically has been like somebody who's frailer. It's easier to bump him off of his spots. Like good luck bumping Kawhi off of anything. So it's like, I look at this offense and I'm like, man, a 7-game series, like who wants to deal with this? Like, I think they can have like, I think I'm saying all this to say like, I think they could have like a really, really good playoff offense. Now, because of the lack of fluidity I see, I think it's just a natural thing. I think all three of those guys, kind of something about them makes it hard for them to exist in that like Kingsian offense, that Nuggets offense. I don't think they'll be like an offense where they're like so good it doesn't matter how good their defense is. Like they're just that good. But I think they're like really, really good, and I'm not too concerned about in a playoffs setting. How do you feel about that?
One of the things that we've seen with James Harden in the past, and not to like, I guess we don't want to harp too much on him, but when, teams key in on shutting down James Harden and what he wants to do and cutting off his water, and, other guys have to start brunting the load. In the past, it's been, less than ideal options. And then you're relying on shooting variance in a lot of cases. But even still, we've seen these Clippers teams prior to James Harden in deep playoff runs where things dry up and they become predictable, one-dimensional, very schemable, and they're just not able to get really anything that they want. And so I guess to me the question really is like, can these two kind of, I don't want to bag on the Clippers too hard, because the Clippers have of course had deep playoff runs even without Kawhi. You know, they went to the conference finals. They're not bad by any means. But you have these two kind of playoff forces that oftentimes culminate into, you know, bad luck, so to speak. I guess that's really the best way to put it. You know, some people will say like they're chokers. I think when people talk about choking, what it really comes down to, like, there's a reason that a team choked. It's very rare that like a player or a team just like, you know, the lights were too bright. I think there are some cases where that might be true. Normally for teams with less playoff experience, but with the Clippers and some of the teams that James Harden has been on in the past, typically the reason that they choked is either because of bad luck or something that the other team was doing that put them away. Again, one exception would probably be Paul George at times in the postseason. Things like hitting the side of the backboard on open corner threes. Again, it happens. The time that it happens, you know, maybe the pressure got to him a little bit. Regardless, the point being, you have these two forces where they have a tendency to make a playoff run and then get shut down. And sometimes it takes 5 games, sometimes it takes 6 games, sometimes it takes 7 games. But teams do figure out in a vacuum the Clippers eventually. Normally it involves Kawhi Leonard not being there, or Paul George not being there, or both not being there. That's a little bit different of a discussion. With James Harden, it's a lot more, you know, the players that were expected to be there were there, one exception being Kyrie Irving. But all that is to say, like, the Clippers, just because James Harden is there, doesn't make them, like you said, this Denver offense or Sacramento kind of offense, or to toot OKC's horn a little bit, even OKC's offense, which, you know, is a little one-dimensional, but also tough to guard. There's just so much that you have to worry about. And I feel like the Clippers, for as good as their offense has been with James Harden, it's not this unstoppable thing. It's not like they came together and then all of a sudden were just, oh my gosh, this team is putting up, you know, 147 points per 100 possessions when James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, and Paul George are on the floor together. It's not a situation like that. It's like, you know, no, when they're on the floor together, they're a good offense. They're probably a top 10 offense when they're on the floor together, which is good. But like overall, they put up good numbers, and on paper they're a good team, but they're not unstoppable. And they don't feel unstoppable to me, which I feel like the thing that I keep coming back to when I'm watching the Clippers is you're not, and this is specifically when they're fully healthy, you don't seem unstoppable right now, but you should be. Like, it feels like they have more than they're showing. Like, there's a lot of missed opportunity here, I feel like. Am I wrong for feeling that way? I feel like they're not getting the most out of everybody yet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that'll. So, I don't think it's a perfect fit, like, between all those pieces. Like, there was a video that came out. I think it was Thinking Basketball who did it. It was kind of talking about like some of the Clippers, like the complexities that make it the what's we're seeing on paper, not like produce on the court. So like, you know, they're like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's the opposite of being greater than the sum of your parts, right? They're like less than the sum of their parts. And it's things like, like Harden's he's never been like really good at like being super decisive, like playing 0.5 basketball, like attacking off the catch, making quick like connector passes. That's never really been his game. He's more like methodical. I like the ball in my hands. They also don't. The thing is, like, they need somebody like a Russell Westbrook, like rim pressure wise, but Russell Westbrook he causes spacing problems. He's not like he's a pretty good defender, this new version of Russell Westbrook, but he's not like a world beating defender to put up with the spacing problems. Zubac is like, he's improving as a passer. I've really been impressed the last couple games with what I'm seeing from him as a passer, but he's not like this Sabonis, like I'll be diming up cutters on backdoor feeds, making like the right decision in the short roll every time. There's things like that make it like, it's just like a weird, like I said, it's a weird fit. It's like you could still see like, okay, now it's Paul George's time to cook. Now let's do like a little shallow pin down for Kawhi Leonard so he could take his little 15-foot mid-range jumper. But the thing is, like, so it reminds me, honestly, what it reminds me of? It reminds me of last season's, like, Boston Celtics in late game offensive situations. Except they have Harden, who's like, so like Harden, like, I don't know, it's like, I have like this theory, right? Where it's like, a guy like Paul George or Kawhi Leonard, right? When in past Clippers iterations of their teams, like the offense grew stagnant because their weakness is like, volume playmaking, right? They're not like, it's not like a Darius Garland type thing where it's like, I can run 40 pick and rolls a game and I'll make the right decision. I'll throw these skip passes and all this and that, right? That's not their game. Like they can blend some playmaking, but primarily they're like very gifted scorers, right? And then you have Harden, who historically his body just like wears down. He's not like his game is like relatively schemable compared to other great offensive players of the past, but he just has incredible like floor game in terms of like his kind of understanding of like how to move the ball, how to keep the ball moving, how to generate good looks, right? So Harden has what he's always needed, which is like guys to take this massive offensive scoring load in the postseason off of his shoulders. Like Kawhi Leonard is like this insanely gifted postseason scorer when he's healthy, right? The health thing we'll have to talk about. We'll have to talk about that a little bit later. So so Harden has that weight lifted off his shoulders, and then he can bring the playmaking, the volume playmaking that Kawhi and PG like desperately crave. So that's why, like, when I compare them to last season's Boston Celtics team, I say that with the caveat that I think their late game offense will be less stagnant because Harden like understands like what needs to happen to generate good looks, and then he can execute that understanding because he has his two mercenaries, his two scoring mercenaries in Kawhi and PG. And honestly, that's like why if you look at their like true shooting numbers, all of them are having like career years. I'll have to double check Paul George, but I know for a fact Kawhi and Harden are having like career years, like true shooting wise, because to me, like that allostatic load in their mind is just being lessened so much from having like those other guys around them. So I don't know. It's like, it's weird. Like, it's like one of those things where it's like the indicators like look really good, but it's like you said, it's not like you'd think like it'd be like, breaking like how the Brooklyn Nets were like breaking like our minds, like with some of the numbers they were putting up. For those of you wondering, the Brooklyn Nets, like that 15 game run with Kyrie, Harden, Durant. But the thing is, like, I'm banking on is like we get into a playoff series, right? It's kind of like that Luka Doncic thing where it's just like so hard to bring this guy down in a fight. Like, I think the three of them, that three-headed monster, is like, okay, you shut off the faucet on James Harden, but now you have to deal with Kawhi Leonard's tough shot making, and then you shut off the faucet on him, and now it's Paul George. But what if you shut off the faucet on Paul George and James Harden is back up and running? Like, it's like it's this thing where it's like it's not
Norm Powell.
No, we need to talk about the Norman Powell because he's kind of like them too. He's kind of like them too. So I think first of all, we need to create a reel of things that I was just like.
This is a good segue.
No. Okay, good. Because we need to create a reel of things that I've said in the past that just like aged poorly so quickly, like the Brook Lopez thing. Remember when the Harden trade happened, and I was like, man, I'd feel so much better about it if they kept Robert Covington and they traded away Norman Powell. I was dead wrong. This guy Norman Powell is like, he's like them. He's like Paul George, Kawhi Leonard light, with the scoring he can do, with the off ball shooting, with the attacking closeouts, all that stuff, right? But anyways, so the thought. You have all of this like offense. I think they're a really good offense, but they're not so elite that like I'm like, you know what? As long as their defense is like just not like getting the brakes beaten off of them, like I really like this team in most playoff series. I don't think it's that level, so that's why I think like the defensive conversation, along with this Norman Powell conversation we're about to have, is so important. But you please go ahead.
So I was looking up some stats specifically for the Norman Powell discussion. But real quick, there's one thing that I wanted to cover before we get into it. I don't know. Have you looked at the Clippers' overall like shot distribution as a team? Kind of like their frequency from three in the mid range and at the rim.
Please bless me with it.
It's a little bit concerning. There are some tendencies that I'm starting to hold. Or I guess tendency is not the right word. General beliefs and like constants that I tend to operate by. And one of them, and I think a lot of people kind of operate this way as well. Teams that don't get to the rim a lot as an offense don't move me a ton. You mentioned the fact that they don't have a ton of rim pressure. I could not agree more. For some context, just to give you an idea of just how little they're getting to the rim. Looking at a team like let's say Milwaukee, I think they're the number 2 offense in the NBA right now. They're attempting 34.7% of their shots at the rim. Pretty good number. League average is 32.9%. So we'll just round up, say 33% is a league average frequency of shots at the rim. The Clippers are only attempting 31%, which, you know, real quick, you could just say like, oh, that's only 2 percentage points below league average. That's not that bad. And I would agree if it wasn't for the fact that they're also not attempting a super high volume of threes. And to me, there's kind of, and there's some nuance to this that I'll cover, but typically to me, to be an elite offense, there's kind of different boxes that you can check. You can either be a team that is just really good at shooting threes, and so you attempt a ton of threes, and your team is just like good enough at making threes that in the regular season you can have a juiced offensive rating because your team just racks up 3-pointers, and you attempt like 39% plus of your threes or of your shots are threes. And then the other way to be like a supercharged offense is to kind of have that even distribution of shots at the rim and shots from three. And that will kind of, you know, optimize your offense. And again, you know, a lot of people get hung up on the discussion of like shots at the rim and shots from three, and like the mid range is dead and no one's using the mid range. And to me, the frequency of where your shots are coming from. I actually just talked about this in a video that I posted yesterday about the Bucks, and I've talked about it in a video I did about the Celtics. The number of shots that you're taking from the perimeter and at the rim, it's not that teams are like, some teams this was the case. Yes, some of the Morey ball stuff, this was the case. But teams aren't going out there and they're not just saying like, only take threes and only take shots at the rim. Like those are the only shots we're going to take. That's not happening. What's happening is they have their offenses designed, and a functional, well-oiled, strong offense will naturally generate high percentage looks. and high percentage looks are open threes and shots at the rim. It's not that these offenses are instructed to explicitly take shots at the rim and shots from three. That is naturally happening because it is a good offense. And to me, being too heavily reliant on one or the other is not a good thing, because in the postseason, we see it happen all the time. We've seen it happen with the Boston Celtics all the time, where the three-pointers stop falling and they just refuse to get to the rim. And it gives them problems, and it's given them problems for years now. And so anytime I'm looking at kind of elite offenses, what I'm looking for personally is a good balance. I want a team to be, not too heavily reliant on one area of the floor. I want to know that their offense can generate a diverse range of shots. And in a way, it's almost not a terrible thing for the Clippers that they're shooting around 35% of their shots from three. I think that makes sense given how much, they're doing a ton of spread pick and roll like we discussed. They run some flare screens for Paul George. They'll occasionally break out a handoff here and there. They generate a good amount of high percentage looks from three. The thing that's weird and makes them tough to evaluate, and I don't know how you feel about this, offenses that attempt a lot of mid-range shots are really tough to evaluate, because that is something that we touched on it earlier that is kind of like tough shot making based. And that's where it's like, the shots are going in a lot of the time, but are they going to go in all the time? Are they going to go in at the rate that they need to? So that's like, before we get into the Norm Powell discussion, that's something that's really been on my mind with the Clippers, is like, they've been a really good offense, but they don't have the indicators of like an offense that has the juice.
Yeah. So I think what you're getting at, right? There's this thing you hear at all levels of basketball: shell defense, right? And the platonic ideal of shell defense is you never break it, you never let offensive teams get in the paint, right? The Clippers kind of like just exist, like taking a lot of shots outside of this shell, whether it be in the mid-range, the 3-point, a lot of these like pull-up jumpers, isolation, elbow shots, whatever. And like normally, like I'm there. I'm like, like another team we could talk about a lot is like last year's Phoenix Suns team, right? Where it's like it became a math problem for them, where it's like they just take way too many twos, these way too many mid-range shots. It's Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and Chris Paul taking all these mid-range shots. There's not enough threes. And like we saw, that fizzled out. It fizzled out against, the team that ended up winning the NBA title, but it fizzled out. And the two things that make this Clippers team different than that Phoenix Suns team to me is the three things. One is, instead of Chris Paul, they have James Harden as that like third head of the dragon, right? And this version of James Harden is better than that version of Chris Paul. I think that's pretty indisputable.
Yeah, definitely fair to say.
I think they have more spacing on the floor. Right? I think both Kawhi Leonard and Paul George can launch 3-pointers at a higher volume than Kevin Durant because of the way their release on their shot works. And then that fifth guy they play is usually a better shooter.
I think that's something very interesting to talk about.
So yeah. So like there's like that's another misconception a lot of people have, is like you can be a good 3-point shooter and like not be a great space. Not that Kevin Durant's a bad spacing threat, but I call it like the Al Horford, Kristaps Porzingis kind of corollary, where it's like Al Horford's like a really good shooter, but you see teams sag off him a lot because like they trust their ability to get back in time with the closeout, because he takes him a little bit longer to get that 3-point shot off than it does Kristaps Porzingis, right? Who like it's like like rockets. He's slingshotting that ball, right?
Right. And like Kawhi Leonard and Paul George both like can come off a screen, and like that release is quick. Like exactly. Kawhi has a quick release where Durant getting the ball going for a shot.
Mm-hmm. And Durant kind of brings the ball pretty low. That's why you see guys can sometimes like swipe at the ball on him, because he brings it pretty low when he takes those threes.
Yep.
That's why his volume is never very like super, super high for somebody as good of a shooter as he is. from three. But anyways, and then that other guy, so the non-center outside of the three-headed dragon, like the Clippers just have better shooters to fill that spot, like Terrence Mann, Norman Powell. I don't know how I feel about Amir Coffey shooting yet, but all three of those guys are like better shooters than like Josh Okogie was, or whoever they tried to occupy in that fifth spot. And then the last thing, which I want to talk about, is I think their defense is better than that Phoenix Suns defense last year. We're gonna get to that, but first let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about the Norman Powell of it all.
So Norman Powell, this is the stat that's like. I love lineup data. Lineup data is like one of my favorite things in basketball because like you can have a lineup that's played, 20 possessions and it's like this team is plus 97.2 in 20 possessions played. And I'm like, whenever I see something like that, I go straight to PBP stats and go to possession finder and I watch those possessions and I'm like, this had to be like in a fourth quarter during like, a game against the Pistons or something where like they were playing against two-way contract guys. That stuff is like my favorite thing in the world. So whenever I'm like researching a team, one of my favorite things to look at is lineup data. Specifically, what I do is I usually go to cleaning the glass and I'll find like, I'll go and see which lineup combos have, like the highest net rating and stuff. And then from there, I kind of like try to reverse engineer. Why is this net rating so high? Like what specifically are they doing that's resulting in them being so good? So that was one thing that I did with the Clippers. And an interesting finding that I came across is they're really, really freaking good when James Harden, Norm Powell, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard are on the floor together. Like insanely good. The problem is we don't have a huge sample size. We don't have a what I would consider like a minuscule sample size. It's not like a 20 possession sample size. They've played 163 possessions where they've had those four guys on the floor together. In those 163 possessions, this team records 139.9 points per 100 possessions, and they allow 97.7 when those four guys are on the floor. What's really kind of the kicker to me is the free throw rate. This team gets to the line 35.1%. They get to the line for every 100 field goal attempts they take, they're taking 35.1 free throw attempts, or making 35.1 free throw attempts. That's what free throw rate is. And a lot of that is Norm freaking Powell is a monster getting to the line. And when you put Norm Powell in a lineup with James Harden, who's great at getting to the line, Paul George, who I think Paul George is sneakily good at getting to the line. When he gets defenders to bite on the pump fakes and Paul George does the thing where he jumps into them for the shot, which the NBA said they were going to crack down on and be like, this isn't a foul anymore. But then that absolutely didn't happen. And they're like, well, yeah, it's still a shooting foul. Different story, different podcast. Point being, all those guys, those four guys that I mentioned, they all know how to get to the line. Kawhi Leonard doesn't get a great whistle, particularly at the rim. In general, I think Kawhi's kind of always gotten a kind of a bad whistle. Again, different discussion, different pod. James Harden, Paul George, and Norm Powell together. I bring up the free throw rate for a specific reason, not because like getting to the line and getting free throws are the most efficient shot in basketball. Yes, all of that is true, but this team's so much harder to defend when the defense knows how good they are at getting to the line. Like when these four guys are on the floor, it's not just that like they're really good players. They are really good players. I think these guys are afforded a little bit more leeway to do the whole like your turn, my turn thing because the defense is playing so, I don't want to say timid, but like they have to reserve themselves a little bit. They have to take a step back and be like, all right, this guy's going to get me if I make a mistake, and he's going to get to the line, and he's going to get free throws. So the defense the whole time, they're sort of walking on eggshells because they have to play differently. You have to play different defense when you're playing guys who are so good at drawing contact. It's a double-edged sword, though, because the calls that they're getting now will be a lot different than the calls that they'll get in the postseason. We've seen this story a million times, where it's not like a steadfast rule, but like very free throw or foul drawing, contact drawing teams / players struggle at times in the postseason because those calls aren't there. Ticky-tacky stuff isn't going to get called as much in the postseason. It's a general constant. And Norm Powell does some egregious stuff sometimes where I'm like throwing his body into the defender. You know, he gets away with a lot that kind of like shouldn't be called that ends up getting called. But like James Harden, as far as like foul grifting goes, I don't think he does like nearly the amount of foul grifting that he's done in the past. In Paul George, I think in general, aside from the stuff that every player does, it's nothing too crazy that wouldn't sustain itself into the postseason. All of that is a long-winded way of saying we talked about how, these elite offenses kind of have these combinations where you're like, whoa, they are blitzing teams when they're on the floor together. Like they're plus a billion, whenever they're on the floor together. To me, the Clippers, this is the combo where I'm like, whoa, they're like, even if the defense was giving up 120 points per 100 possessions when they're on the floor together, they would still be plus 20. Like, they can get away with being a bad defense because their offense, when these guys share the floor, is so good. So what are your thoughts, like, just stemming off of the Norm Powell discussion? Because I think there's more to unpack there as it relates to Terrence Mann as well. Because I have some concerns about him.
Trey Mann, there's nothing to unpack with Trey Mann.
Yeah, Trey Mann, he's getting playing time now.
Oh, good for him. I'm happy for Trey. And I'm not trying to be like an asshole about it. Like, good for him. But okay, so you said a lot. So like, it's like we talked about, and no. I like it. I love it. I love you.
I love you too.
But so we talked about like this 3-headed dragon, right? And I wouldn't say Powell gets to be the 4th head, right? He's not like the 4th head of the dragon, but he's like their like trusty steed. Like he can get hot and look like a star guard. Like would you consider him like a combo guard? I'm curious. Or would you say he's more of a wing? This is an aside, but
that's a really good question. I think I probably lean a little bit more wing. But he's like a combo wing, I guess. Like that's probably the best way I can put it. Because
I wanted to say, because like, we were just talking about this pre-show for another episode, but like, I'm really obsessed with that like Malik Monk player type, because it's like this thing where it's like, most nights he's just like a good like bench scorer, but like there's those nights where he can masquerade as a superstar, and like those kind of guys can like win you a game in a playoff series. And Norman Powell has that kind of juice. I remember last year, I think it was a loss, but he ended up scoring like 40 points in a playoff game against the Suns or something crazy like that. So it's like, so we know, right? We talk a lot about these closing lineups, and I know that's kind of oversimplifying a little bit, but it's important to kind of get this feel. Like, how good is that closing 5? How good you have that like Denver Nuggets 5, right? That you could really lead on. We know that the 3 dragons, Harden, George, Leonard, they're going to be in your closing 5. So we've been talking about all of this, right? And it's like, with Powell as one of those guys, like your offense gets ramped up even more. I still don't think I still don't think it's like, again, it's like that level where you just don't care about defense. Like you need some defense. So like my thinking is like, so I have a couple, like I have this conundrum, right? Where it's like a couple things. And I know we've only got about 10 minutes left. So we've got to try to get through all this quick. So I've had, okay, one thing when they traded away like the Covington, all those guys I was worried about was the Clippers no longer had that small ball 5 pitch that they threw at the Utah Jazz way back when to come at. Like, cause like, I mean, they tried it with PJ Tucker. I think PJ Tucker's, he's kind of gassed. I think it's his best days are well behind him.
Yeah.
So I've seen them do it. I saw them in the Dallas game last week go with like Kawhi Leonard, the small ball 5, with Powell and Mann as the other guys out there. I don't know how tenable that is. Maybe that's why his hips all fucked up now. So I don't think they have like a legit small ball pitch to throw. But my thing is, so my assumption is Mason Plumlee comes back. He's the backup center, right? I'm like looking out west and I'm like, who actually could play like Zubac or Plumlee off the floor? Like realistically, like who would be able to do that? Because like the way the league is going now, we've kind of moved away from the small ball thing. And we were playing bigger guys. So like, I mean, you would want one of those guys on the floor against Jokic, right? You want maybe like OKC would be able to play him off the floor, but at the same time, maybe they could like come back and like really just feed Zubac in the post and try to make life hard on Chet, even though Chet's done really well in those situations lately.
You'd need like a crazy, like poppable 5, like a team that is like Chet. I think is such a good popper that like you don't know if he's going to pop or if he's going to roll. So like if you don't pull the 5 out, then you're going to get burned every time. But I think the amount of teams that actually have the ability to have their 5 pop on like a meaningful basis and hit the threes on a meaningful basis or attack the closeout and be efficient attacking the closeout. Like I think the number of teams that can actually do that is relatively small, which is why it's so hard to play, guys like Zubac off the floor. But anyways, continue.
Yeah, so I don't think that could. I'm not like too worried about that happening, right? So one of those guys, depending on who's, I know Plumlee can play a little bit higher on screens than Zubac, a little bit more mobile. I know Zubac is probably like a better interior force, but so whoever's playing better that night or in that series is your other guy, right? It's your 4th guy. So my question is, because I've realized like I still think Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are very, very good defenders, right? But I think they're best utilized in that like Jordan Pippen off ball, like, let's defensive playmake, let's use our length, let's help on the back line, all these things. And you want your Ron Harper, who's going to be that point of attack pit bull. So that's where the conundrum comes, because it's like, I mean, I think between the 3 of them, it really depends on the day between Terrence Mann and Amir Coffey. But I don't think either one of them does enough for me offensively in a playoff setting for me to be like, okay, I don't think either one of them is like a good enough defender where their offensive trade-offs are like offset with how much defense. Like neither one of them is like that, like all defensive team level point of attack guy where it's like, okay, like, especially with like Terrence Mann, who's like, he has offensive skill. Don't get me wrong. Like he's had big moments in the playoffs before, but like, it's like, you're not bringing enough defensively for like, okay. So with Powell on the floor, right, they get closer to that. Like they're like a really, really good. So there's 2 reallys in that good offense, right? With Terrence Mann on the floor instead of Powell, they're just like a really good offense.
Right.
And so my thing is like, I'm trying to figure out what's more important, being like a really, really good offense with Powell, but being a lesser defense. Cause like, even when Powell is locked in, like he's not as good of a defender as Terrence Mann. Right. So like, what is like the better option here? Is like, do you deal with Powell on the floor and then maybe you have to move Paul George as like the primary point of attack defender, and then Paul George isn't as good on offense anymore because he's so tired on defense, but then you have Norman Powell to offset that? Or is it, do you want Mann in that Ron Harper role where he's like the head of the serpent, and then you got Kawhi and Paul George kind of wrecking havoc in the back line, you have that big man in the middle. So that's like, I'm trying to figure out that blend. And if there is like a perfect alchemy to all of that, then that they can channel that makes them like this super dangerous, like finals contender.
Yeah,
I said a lot. Please, Alex, the floor is yours.
I'm with you. Like,
Mm.
when I've been parsing through, we have I feel like I have the who's an actual contender discussion every week at this point, which is fine because I think I think that is a discussion that is meaningful from the start of the season to the end of the season. It is one where like it is constantly ebbing and flowing, and teams are learning about themselves and who they are throughout the entire season. It is a very fluid thing, and one of the things that like I see as something that pops up consistently with contenders is like they have, you know, whenever their starters are on the floor. Like, for example, the Bucks are like this. The Celtics are definitely like this. They're probably the number one team like this in the NBA. But when their starters are on the floor together, the teams that I kind of consider contenders, true contenders, when their starters are on the floor together, they're unstoppable. Like, they're just destroying teams when they have their guys out there. And we've been saying it, but like it's weird because the Clippers, they're just good when their starters are on the floor together. They're not spectacular. They're not running teams off the floor. They're not going on these massive, you know, huge giant runs and putting the games away before before halftime. You know, in some cases they are, as my cat starts to open the window. But like, you know, when their starters are on the floor, they have a net rating of plus 16. But like, if you look at the Celtics and you look at the Bucks and you look at the Timberwolves and the Nuggets, when you look at those teams, it's like they're plus like 50 when their starters are on the floor. Like they're demolishing teams. And so the Clippers, it's like you said, and it's like we've been saying this entire episode. It's like, what is that combination where even if you have deficiencies when you're staggering the minutes and you have to bring some of the bench guys on the floor to get these guys rest because they're all 50 years old, what is that combination that you can put on the floor where you're like, you know, is it James Harden, Terrence Mann, Norm Powell, Paul George, and Kawhi at the 5? And is that your lineup where you're like just murdering teams? Like, what is your ace in the hole where you're like, all right, you may beat us when we have the bench out there. You may beat us when we have, a Zubats on the floor. You may beat us when we have to play Amir Coffey. But when we have these 5 guys on the floor, you're not doing anything against us, and we're getting everything that we want. And the Clippers have not found that yet. They've maybe stumbled upon things that might be that, but they haven't experimented with that enough and truly like gotten to the bottom of what that is. And I think that's probably the overarching thing with them is like, there could be something here that is very, 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 very good, elite, but they haven't found it quite yet. They are still very good, but they're not quite there. They got to keep throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks, to me, at least. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to wrap up the episode because we're going to try to keep this. We're trying to keep these around an hour. So we just hit the hour mark, and that's going to do it on our discussion on the Clippers. If you guys have other, I guess, teams or topics that you want us to talk about, there's an option on Spotify where you can let us know what you want to hear. So go ahead and leave an answer. If you're on Apple Podcasts or if you're on YouTube, let us know in the comments what you want us to cover. We have stuff we want to talk about, but we're always open to suggestions and always looking for new things to dive into. So as always, if you guys enjoyed the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating. It helps us out a ton. The support has been fantastic. Subscribe if you're listening on YouTube. Go check us out on Twitter at AlexHoops_, at Mat Issa 15. Thank you guys, as always, so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.